Alright, so welcome back to round one of the Momir Daily here. Looks like we are going to be on... Well, we lost the die roll. Some people choose to go second at Momir Big. So we'll wait for our opponent to make that decision. So, I'm actually okay going first or second at Momir Basic. I like going first because you get to hit the higher converted mana cost creatures first, but I do like going second because you do get an extra creature out of the deal. So it really doesn't matter to me either way. If we go first, we'll be starting to make creatures on turn 3. That's typically my strategy. There's a lot of people start on turn 2, hopefully trying to get some sort of mana accelerant or something like that, because mana advantage is very important in this format, but there's also a lot of blanks at 2, so I'd rather just go for 3 and try to get just a bigger creature, which will usually happen more likely than getting a mana accelerant on if you go for it on 2. So, and if I go second, of course I'll just start at 2 and go all the way up to 8, as I mentioned in the intro video. So hopefully my opponent will show up soon. While we're waiting on him, I'll go over a couple more things about the Momir format here. One thing to keep in mind is that the creatures that the Momir avatar makes are actually tokens. There are no real creatures in the format, so that does change how certain effects work. For example, blink effects or bounce effects are basically just straight up removal because your opponent, it's a token, so your opponent's not going to get anything back out of it if you were to blink it or bounce it. Also, if you get a flip card from Innistrad, they do not have a backside, so they will never flip because they are tokens. And anything that references non-token creatures is pretty much just a blank ability because there will only be token creatures in the game. And as I mentioned a minute ago, as far as the mana acceleration, mana advantage is actually very important in this format. If you can generate more mana on your turn than you should be, then you're actually generating bigger and better creatures, and you're going to get to 8 first, which is, again, as I mentioned in the intro video, 8 is the important threshold for making creatures in this format. So that's the goal. Anything that would add extra mana or let you play get you extra lands is actually very important. So hopefully our opponent will show up before too much longer so we can actually start the game. Then again, I'm not going to be opposed if my opponent doesn't show up and I get a win. Very boring for the video, but still good for me, so we'll see. I'm actually going to pause the recording until our opponent shows up, so that way you guys don't have to sit here through a bunch of dead air. Okay, so our opponent has finally shown up and has decided to play first. So, never mulligan in Momir Basic because you're always just going to draw 7 basic lands, and it really doesn't matter in the long run what those basic lands are. So, our opponent leads with a mountain. We will be doing the same. So here we'll see if our opponent chooses to go for it on 2 or wait for 3. Like I said, strategies vary in this point. So he does decide to go for it on 2, and he gets a mana accelerant, of course. So that's going to put us pretty far behind, unfortunately, but not completely unwinnable. We could always hit something that will deal with his mana accelerant. So instead, we get a grizzly bear. So not too bad. Our opponent is going to be making a 4-drop here, which is very bad for us. Alright, discard a card at random. That's actually very good for us, because that puts our opponent even further behind since he chose to make a 2. At some point, he's going to have to skip some drops if he wants to make it to 8. So this actually is a very good thing for us. So unfortunately, it is a 5/4, so that is a very large creature that we need to try to find something to deal with here. that is not going to help us in the slightest. So we're actually very far behind here for game one. Our opponent may choose, yeah. Looks like our opponent's going to skip making a creature this turn, which isn't a terrible decision on his part since he does have this giant creature in play already that we have no way of dealing with at the moment. So I would not be surprised if he didn't make anything this turn to try to catch up on his mana, or on his cards. So let's see if our 4-drop can compare to his. It is a 4/5 defender, so yes, we will certainly take that, as it will completely deal with this guy by itself. I'm going to go ahead and attack. If he wants to block with his mana guy, I'm perfectly fine with that, and we need to try to get some damage in while we can because of the giant hit we've already taken. So do keep in mind that you do start at 24 life in this format as opposed to the normal 20. So our opponent gets... This guy is actually very good, as I mentioned earlier, because all of the creatures are tokens, so I would expect our opponent to play an island soon, so he can start dealing with any green creatures that we get on a permanent basis. I am actually going to block here. I'd rather kill this guy than deal with this guy later, since the other guy had a higher power. So, and we're at the point now where the mana difference isn't that huge, so our creatures should start being on par with what our opponent gets. For example, we get a 5/3 to match up against his 4/5. So we may have actually come out of this okay, but our opponent is going to get to 8 first, which could be very devastating for us. And there's the island, as I predicted. So our opponent gets a flying creature, and that's... Flying is so good in this format because they're just, I mean, you basically have to get another flying creature yourself in order to be able to deal with it. So basically we have to hope for any creature that isn't green because of his king crab right now. So, and we get a green creature, of course. Well, it's not looking good for game one here. We're not dead yet. We still have plenty of time, and there are several very powerful creatures in this format, so it's still possible we can come out of this okay. You'll notice our opponent left up 2 mana here so he can crab away our green creature. So this ability is basically a blank because he will never cast a spirit or arcane spell, so we're looking at a 4/4 guy here, which is okay because we still have our massive ghouls to deal with one of these, but we need to find a way to deal with this Imperial Hellkite very quickly. Preferably an answer that isn't green. That'll not do it, because it's a 5/5. But this could make our opponent hesitant to swing, since we do get to swing back with Vigilance and still have a blocker. I'm going to go ahead and... if I swing with this guy, it's just going to make him use his crab. But he's going to use his crab at the end of turn anyway, so let's just go ahead and attack. It's possible our opponent could have F6'd. I doubt it, but people do make mistakes like that, so that's a good reason to swing, just in case. Our opponent makes his first 8-drop. Fortunately, this is one of the weaker 8-drops. I mean, it is still a 4/7 Vigilance, so it pretty much blanks any attack we have other than our Archangel, but it is still a good creature. So. Alright, so we need something very good here. Something with flying, like a Chroma. A Chroma would be fantastic. Haha! Fantastic! I really just can't believe I called that one. So this is actually good for us because now we can get on the aggression here. Chroma keeps this guy at bay by herself, which is fantastic, and we do have the 2 vigilant flyers. So, well, that's bad. Obviously, we have one turn to find a way to kill our opponent because this guy will kill us no matter what. So let's go ahead and make an 8-drop here and see what we can do. Hopefully some way to deal with this guy or push through enough damage to kill our opponent this turn. Let's see. He can't block this, but he can block this. If we had... Oh no, it's fine because Akroma blocks this guy with first strike damage and... Okay, yeah, I didn't think about the effect that Akroma has first strike. Because the first strike damage will kill the Death Coil Worm before our opponent gets to use its ability. And we still have the Archangel to block the Imperial Hellkite in case something crazy goes up. So we're not actually dead yet. We might actually be able to win here because Akroma's going to hit for 6 here. And then if he doesn't find anything, then we win on the swing back on our turn once Akroma kills the Death Coil Worm this turn. So Akroma, like I said, 8s are where the magic happens. She is just so good. Our opponent gets a red flyer, which Akroma has protection from. So good game, opponent. It's almost not even worth the block here because our opponent has no onboard trick to pump the dragon, and that would just put us to 1. So we are definitely going to block here. He probably attacked with this to try to convince us to block this with Akroma, but we're not going to. And then we're just going to go ahead and block there. Just on principle, because you never know. Yeah, our opponent recognized that Akroma was going to swing back for the win. So we managed to pull that one out even after being very far behind. So that's actually, I'm actually very happy about that. Like I said, 8 drops are where the magic happens. So there's obviously no sideboarding in Momir Basic. You're not going to swap out basic lands. So now we do it again. Hopefully we can pull out a win here as well. I assume our opponent's probably going to go first again. People typically choose to do the same every time. So, and he did. So again, no mulligan because you're just going to draw 7 basic lands. Two turns of Mountain Pass. Opponent, based on prior experience, I assumed our opponent would attempt another 2-drop here. Hopefully, it would be much weaker than the one he got last time. Yeah, so he can soulbond this guy, so it is a very good blocker, but it's not really going to give our opponent that big of an advantage because the first time it blocks, it will die. So we get a 1/1 regenerator. I'll play a swamp just in case it comes up. I don't think that there will be a time when I want to save mana to regenerate this guy, at least not in the early game. You typically just want to use all your mana to make a creature whenever possible. So it's not really... Although, I'll attack here, and if my opponent wants to block, I don't have a problem regenerating it. Okay, so he didn't, so we'll go ahead and make a 3-drop. I'm going to go ahead and discard all these islands so that we don't get killed by something with Island Walk. Sacrifice permanent, return target creature to its owner's hand. Okay, this guy is fantastic. So we're going to, at some point in this game, we're going to trade this guy for something very large that our opponent plays. Ooh. Yeah, our opponent chose not to keep his Wrathy Dragon because he would have had to sacrifice 2 mountains, which he doesn't even have. So even if he had had 2 mountains, I can't imagine he would want to sacrifice them, especially when we have this guy in play. It would have put him way too far behind on board. So we're actually in very good shape right now, with Baron and our opponent having no creatures in play. Because every time we make a creature, it's more fuel for Baron to deal with anything large our opponent might get in a moment. So we get a Swamp Walk, and it makes our opponent discard a card when it hits. This guy is very good since our opponent already has a Swamp in play, because if we can make him discard cards from his hand, then it's going to stop him from getting, either he's going to have to not make creatures for a turn, or he's not going to get to the 8 mana threshold that is so desirable in this format. So he gets a 4/5, which enters the battlefield tapped. We're perfectly okay with that. He's probably going to Soul Bond, which he did. So not too worried. I can always just bounce this guy if he becomes a problem. So I'm actually going to attack before making a creature this turn, just in case the creature we make would prevent this from hitting our opponent for whatever reason. That is a possibility. So he can't block. So he's going to have to discard a card here, which is going to put him pretty behind on tempo. And now we are going to... Now we'll make our 5-drop and see what we get. I'm not too worried about this. I'm not going to save up mana for Baron just yet. It's very likely we could get a 5-drop that would just deal with this guy. So each creature that's a barbarian, a warrior, or a berserker gets +2/+2 and haste. Well, we don't have any of those yet, but there are a lot of different options on those creature types, so it is possible we'll get something, which that could be pretty good actually. So we will see. So we get a 5/5 vanilla here. Basically, I say vanilla because this ability is irrelevant in Momir Basic. We're probably going to get attacked by this 4/5 Death Touch. Probably this 1/1 Death Touch too. I kind of want to block here just to get rid of the Death Touch aspect of this guy. We can always... I think it's actually probably more correct to save this guy to use with Baron. So the 1 extra damage isn't going to do that much, and the Death Touch on this guy is not that relevant either since it already has 4 power. So we're going to not block here. Okay, so again we're going to go ahead and attack with this guy. So our opponent is basically stuck at 6 drops unless he wants to skip a turn to make a guy. And so we're pretty okay with that actually. And at this point it might almost be better for us to just start bouncing his guys, because he's going to hit a point where he's not going to be able to make any more guys. But we'll wait and make that decision based on what our opponent does next turn, if he plays a land or plays a creature. Because six drops, there are a lot of good 6 drops, so I'd like to hit one here. A 5/3 is good. That allows us to trade with either of his creatures, especially the Death Touch one here. So our opponent is going to make a 6-drop, so he gets a Nuclevi, which is a 4/4 vanilla, again because there are no instants or sorceries to return from his graveyard. So we're going to block this guy, and with our Pavel Maliki. That's a great thing about this format, is you see all these old creatures that used to exist in Magic. Well, I mean, they still exist, but nobody actually plays with them anymore, so... Yeah, I'm perfectly fine blocking here, and I'm going to go ahead and block here, just so we can stop the Death Touch stuff from happening again. Because we've got these 2 guys that we can sack to Baron if we need to. This guy's use is pretty much over at this point, except as just getting in for 2 damage every turn, guaranteed. So, I think I'm okay with the creatures that he has in play currently. I'd like to make a 7-drop here as opposed to holding up for Baron. Chances are any 7-drop we get, we'll be able to deal with either one of these pretty effectively. So, for example, Thorn Elemental, who is going to kill our opponent very quickly. So with this guy in play, we do want to start... Now we're going to start using our Baron to our advantage, making sure our opponent is not in a position to block this effectively, and is going to be behind on creatures for the rest of the game. So next turn I'm going to make a 6-drop and save up for Baron, and that should allow us to pretty much put the game away at this point. So, I mean, again, it's Momir Basic, so our opponent can make a 6-drop that just blows us out of the water. Who knows? I'm not really sure what our opponent... It's possible our opponent may be double queuing. That could account for the wait time at the beginning of the round. So our opponent is going to make another 6-drop, which is probably in his best interest right now. He gets a 5-4 vanilla and has conceded the game. So he knew that Baron was going to... he pretty much guessed exactly what I was just talking about as far as what I was going to start doing with Baron. So round 1, success. So that's it for now. I will see you guys again in round 2.